Well, first of all, I want to wish the Oxford Internet Institute a happy 10th birthday. I've been a great proponent of the formation and execution of this enterprise, and I congratulate you on making it what it is today, along with many of your colleagues. Second, I'd like to acknowledge that Richard Dawkins is with us in the audience today at my invitation, partly because I want to draw on some of the things that he has written. I have great respect for his thought processes, thinking, and method of analysis. So I hope I don't embarrass you, sir, in the course of drawing on some of your ideas. I also wanted to mention something about broadband. Just in passing, broadband is whatever you don't have right now. And I remember a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away when 1,200 bits per second replaced 300 bits per second, and I thought that was enough because it was faster than I could read. Of course, we've soon learned that anytime you get more bandwidth, you want more. I'm sure there's a selfish gene hiding in here somewhere, Dr. Dawkins, but what I want to focus on right now is what happens when everything gets connected to everything. And the internet is a platform which permits that kind of thing to happen. With enough technology, with lower and lower cost computing equipment, and ability to put communications into virtually any kind of equipment, any device, we run into the potential for literally hooking everything up to everything in this network environment. So I want to give you just an example of some of the things that are showing up as part of the internet environment that I had not anticipated would be here. I used to tell jokes about ToasterNet. I mean, one day a toaster will be on the internet. Well, people have actually done that. You can send an SNMP control packet to say how burned you want your toast. And I used to tell jokes about internet-enabled light bulbs, until someone showed me an internet-enabled light bulb a couple of weeks ago. It's an LED light bulb. It costs about $15. It probably lasts about 15 years because it doesn't have a filament to burn out. And it has an IPv6 radio in it. So you can remotely control the light bulb, determine its state, turn it off, and turn it on. Now, I know some of you will say, well, only a geek would want to do that. But the fact is that more and more devices are becoming part of the internet. They are there for a number of useful reasons. Sometimes they're there because they're protecting your security. Sometimes they're there because they're managing the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, making buildings more efficient in this day and age where environmental concerns have increased. In some cases, they're there because they want your entertainment to be more appropriate and more timely. There are lots of equipments today that you have at home that are controlled by remote infrared devices. If you're like me, you have a little pile of those on the table and you fumble around trying to figure out which one is the right one to do that box, and that's the one with the dead battery in it, of course. So I want to do away with all that and make the mobile part of your local home network and make all of the entertainment equipment a part of that same network and make it remotely accessible through the internet. Now, obviously, you need to have strong access control, two-factor authentication, because you don't want the 15-year-old next door to reprogram the house while you're away. But the fact of the matter is that by creating that kind of infrastructure, you create an opportunity for third parties to offer services. So, for example, my entertainment equipment at home is actually reachable through the internet. Third parties are already considering ways of offering you to populate the DVR with the videos you want, populate the iPods and the other devices with the music that you want, whether it's in the car or the things you carry around or things that are at home. So this notion of a third-party service being created out of the fabric of the communications that these devices are part of is actually a very interesting opportunity. We see this over and over in the internet. When you add something, it becomes an opportunity for new applications. Example, mobiles. Mobiles have increasingly become internet accessible, and the consequence of that is that not only can they be used simply as endpoint devices for you to communicate, whether it's to take a video and upload it, or to download and watch a video or listen to audio, but also to become controllers. Those devices have also become application support platforms. That's why we have app stores and things like that. And often those applications reach out through the mobile telephone network into the internet in order to make those applications useful. So I want to give you another example of the sort of thing that I think we will see more often. I have a sensor network at home. I'm very proud of this because it's an IPv6 radio network. It's self-forming like a mobile ad hoc network, except it's not mobile. It's just everything is fixed in position. But the devices are small enough to be physically moved around. So these little sensors in each room in the house are sampling the temperature, the humidity, and light level every 5 minutes. And then they record that data in a server that's down in a rack in my basement. I know, once again, you would say only a geek would want to do that. The whole point about doing it was to gather data about the state of the house and the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning over the course of a year. And then at the end of the year, I had real engineering data about how well the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning actually worked. So when the engineers come out to try to adjust that system, they have solid data to base this on and not anecdotal reports of the house was hot in this room in the summer or too cold in that room in the winter. The wine cellar is one of the places where I'm instrumented, and it's important to keep that below 60 degrees Fahrenheit and above 35 or 40% humidity to keep the corks from drying out. So twice a day, I get a report from the house about how things are going. And if it should happen that that the cooling system in the wine cellar fails and the temperature breaks through 60 degrees Fahrenheit, I get an SMS on my mobile. So this actually happened once when I was out on a 3-day visit to Argonne National Laboratory. As I was walking into the building, the mobile went off. It was the wine cellar calling. And it said, you know, you've just broken through the 60-degree Fahrenheit barrier. Unfortunately, my wife was away on a 2-week trip, so there was no one there to reset the cooling system. So every 5 minutes for 3 days, I kept getting a note saying, your wine is warming up. By the time I got home, it was 70 degrees in the wine cellar, which is not the end of the world, but not good. So I called up the people that make the equipment, Archrock, which is recently acquired by Cisco. I said, do you make remote actuators? And they said yes. And he said, do you have strong access control on them so that the 15-year-old next door, et cetera? So they said yes. So that's now going to be a little weekend project to install the remote actuator. But then I got to thinking, you know, I can actually tell if somebody's gone into the wine cellar because they have to turn the lights on, and I can detect that. But I don't know what they've done in there. So I thought, well, why don't I put an RFID chip on each bottle? And then I can now do an instantaneous inventory in order to see whether any bottles have left the wine cellar without my permission. But an engineering friend of mine was debugging this, and he pointed out that you could go into the wine cellar and drink the wine and leave the bottle. So, okay, that's a bug. So now we have to put sensors in the cork. And as long as we're going to go to the trouble of doing that, we might as well put the sensors that can sample the esters that make the wine, you know, give the wine its flavor, and then before you open the bottle, you interrogate the cork. And if that's the bottle that got up to 90 degrees Fahrenheit because the cooling system failed, that's the bottle you give to somebody who doesn't know the difference. And so this is a very practical thing to have. Now, the point here is that this is actually something that we will see more and more. We will see houses, buildings, offices, and the like fully instrumented, whether it's for security or HVAC or other reasons. And I believe that that will be an example of a common practice increasingly around the world. Now, there is a side effect of this kind of population of devices all over everywhere. It's a kind of information ecosystem that gets created because those devices are generating information, whether it's the sensor system or people with mobiles that are uploading information. We are creating a sea of information that these devices are transacting. And I think that it's fascinating to think a little bit about how that ecosystem evolves. Because over time it has changed. There's more information, different kinds of information. Now it's video and audio instead of just text and perhaps still imagery. This really should be called an ecosystem. It's made up of software. And there are lots and lots of hands in that software modifying it, changing it, and evolving it. I don't think that we have the same set of rules that Dr. Dawkins was able to characterize in his work. I think it's a less well-defined kind of movement, but it is an adaptation to the environment. It's just like the purposeless kind of evolution that we see in biological systems. It is the environment that determines how these things change, whether it's the legal environment or it's technology that makes things possible. So I think it's valuable for us to think about the internet and its parts as a kind of information ecosystem that has the capability to evolve. I also think that it calls attention to the birth, the life, and death of information. Information is created, but sometimes it disappears. Sometimes it simply dies. Sometimes the places where it was stored go away. Sometimes it's stored, but we can't find it. And the reason we might not be able to find it is that the domain name system might be used to point to it, but if you fail to renew your registration of the domain name, a reference to it in a URL is no longer useful. In fact, if anything, it's worse. If somebody else gets their hands on the domain name system and the thing that used to point to your information now points to something else, and somebody goes there because you referred to it in a scholarly paper, and the reader of the scholarly paper wonders what you were thinking when you go to this other website, which is, contains things that you hope are not the grandchildren. The whole point here is that it's not a stable system. So we are going to have to think more carefully about the lifetime of information and the stability of our ability to find it. It's worse than that. There's another problem that is already manifesting, and I call it bit rot. We use software to create and interpret and render information. And increasingly, the data that we create, the files that we create with that information in it are increasingly complex. In fact, they can't be interpreted without the benefit of the software that creates them. If that software is not maintained in perpetuity, if a company that makes the software decides that they can't afford to maintain it anymore, or they won't maintain it on this operating system anymore, for perfectly sound business reasons, you may have invested a huge amount of time and effort in creating a large body of content which will no longer be renderable or interpretable. If we don't find a regime that permits that software to be maintained in perpetuity or accessible in perpetuity, we may find that we are surrounded by rotten bits that are not interpretable by anyone. So we need to find ways to make that happen. There are lots of intellectual property issues associated with trying to maintain software over a long period of time. The clouds may turn out to be useful as emulators of older systems so that we can keep interpretation going. I think the last thing I want to draw your attention to is that increasingly we are seeing the real world mirrored in the virtual world or in the cyber world. And this manifests itself in one way in what some people call augmented reality. Here's an example. Irwin Jacobs, who is the chairman of the board of Qualcomm, gave a really interesting demonstration in San Diego a week ago. He brought his mobile out and he held the mobile over a Korean restaurant menu. So what we saw in the mobile's display was what the camera of the mobile saw, which was the Korean menu. But that image had been transmitted over to the internet to a system that could do optical character recognition and translate the Korean into English and translate the Korean prices into, in this case, US dollars. So he literally held his mobile on top of a real world thing and translated it into something that he could interpret that was meaningful in this virtual space. And I suggest to you that as time goes on and as more parts of the internet are fully connected with these devices, that the real world and the virtual world will merge together and that the information about them will become a powerful tool for our use. Mr. Chairman, I'll stop there. We can do Q&A now, or we can wait until everyone else has a shot. Thank you. I'm happy to. The problem is not whether the questions are quick, it's whether the answers are quick.
It's just interested in the future of governing all of someone's data once they die. We've obviously got photos, music, all sorts over one's lifetime. Okay, I have to confess that I'm having trouble hearing it because I'm trying to follow my hearing impaired. What happened when okay, so when I got But, this is almost as bad as the questions I got asked in Moscow. 4 times I was asked, do you believe in God?
In public, I was asked a question, and it's because of my title, Chief Internet Evangelist. I finally told them, well, I'm geek orthodox. So the answer is, when I die, somebody else, it's somebody else's problem to deal with all this stuff. But I do have a plan. And the plan is that on my grave there will be a laptop which is solar powered, and it will randomly send out emails. This is called Eternal Flame. I think that's all the time we got.